everybody, welcome to the Secret Lair Showdown Finals for MagicCon Minneapolis. Mary Bertholdi joined by Monty Devuti here on the Good Luck High Five set. 32 players qualified to play in the super exclusive event. Now we're here at the finals, and the prize is incredible, Monty.
Yeah, Maria, it's pretty fantastic. Already getting a rag event just for qualifying and being able to play in the tournament. But first place gets both an oversized and a regular foil Secret Lair Brainstorm. Only the second of its kind in the world. These have been given out at each MagicCon this year, which means only Philadelphia so far, the second one here in Minneapolis, and by the end of the year, there will be a total of 4.
In existence. Wow, so this is a really, really cool and unique prize for these players. We have Andrew Sullano competing with Rakdos Midrange and Richard Neal with 5-color ramp. So talk to me about these decks, starting with Rakdos Midrange.
Yeah, I mean, Rakdos Midrange, for anybody that watched the Pro Tour, maybe even didn't, you should know by now, this is the deck of Standard. It's playing the best cards. You're looking for this curve of Blood Tithe Harvester into Fable of the Mirror Breaker, the best card in Standard, into Shieldred. That's the ideal way to go, and really you're just trying to combine aggression with card advantage and disruption, and the deck really feels like it has everything.
All right, the deck has everything, so what can Richard Neal do? Well, we're going to find out. He's playing 5-color ramp.
Yeah, this 5-color ramp deck is really cool. We saw the Canadian team bring it. They put a player into the top 4 of the Pro Tour in David Olson, and it's been brought as the Rakdos killer, the mid-range killer. This deck is trying to have its own curve, but it actually starts at turn 3, where you're trying to start things off with a Topiary Stomper. That curves into one of the new battles from March of the Machine, Invasion of Zendikar. If you have that curve by turn 5, you're going to be working with 7 mana, and at 7, this deck can really do anything. You have access to Herd Migration, Itali, Primal Conqueror, Atraxa, as well as cards like Archangel of Wrath. So once you're at 7, this deck can really just overpower its opponents.
All right, I'm excited to see this match, so let's get into it. All right, everybody, it's time for the Secret Lair Showdown Finals. Andrew Sullano on Rakdos Midrange, Richard Neal on 5-color ramp. And we're underway for game 1.
Yeah, as we saw in the Pro Tour, the 5-color ramp deck is here to beat Rakdos Midrange. We even saw David Olson, who top-8'd with the deck, made it all the way to top 4, say that in the middle of sideboarding, he typically just shuffles up the deck and presents it again unless the opponent's list has a very varied sideboard plan.
Right, Blood Tithe Harvester getting underway there for Andrew Sullano. Definitely the card you want to see on turn 2 of Rakdos Midrange.
Yeah, and Andrew's looking for the typical curve, but for Richard, this is how the game starts out most of the time, and the big test is going to be whether he has the Topiary Stomper on turn 3 to kick things off for the ramp deck.
All right, so Blood Tithe Harvester is going to get in there, knocking Richard Neal down to 17, followed up with a Graveyard Trespasser.
That is not a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Andrew has a nice aggressive start, and aggression is the key to winning in this matchup for the Rakdos Midrange deck, but you don't have that card selection that Fable offers you with the second chapter. So if Richard has this Topiary Stomper, this game could spiral out of control for Andrew pretty quickly.
All right, we're just tapping 2 mana. We've got an Ossification here to deal with that Blood Tithe Harvester, so no Stomper yet, Monty.
No Stomper yet. The next big test for Richard is whether he has that Invasion of Zendikar, the new battle from March of the Machine, to ramp him up towards that magic number of 7.
Graveyard Trespasser hits the red zone, knocking Richard Neal down to 14. The beats keep coming here. Whoa, giant flyer.
Yeah, not every Rakdos list plays Archfiend of the Dross as Andrew's list does. Typically you see it 1 or 2 of, but it's a nice way to add some aggression on top of the Shieldreds you already have at the 4 slot. 4 mana 6/6 is just very large, and typically, especially when it comes to Standard, you are going to end the game before those oil counters ever come into effect.
All right, so Richard Neal kind of up against it here. Only 3 mana in play currently. Is he possibly in trouble?
He's in a little bit of trouble. This 5-color ramp deck has a lot of removal between Ossification, Leyline Binding, and it even typically has access to some copies of Sunfall in the main. If this is Invasion of Zendikar, then Richard is likely going to be taking 9 damage here, and then will be at 5 trying to stabilize the next turn, but the tools for stabilization are there for the ramp deck.
All right, an Invasion of Zendikar it is. for Richard Neal. So we'll see if he can come back into this next turn. Like you said, I mean, he's got some work to do, but this deck can do it.
He's got some work to do, but this deck is definitely more than capable of doing it, as you do see him go and get those basics. It looks like Domain is already fully online, so a card like Leyline Binding now is only 1 mana, so you are more than capable of double spelling if you're this deck. The Archfiend is, of course, the big threat on the board right now, but there's plenty of single target removal for this 5-color ramp deck to stabilize things from here.
All right, so we're going to cut Richard's deck there and crack a blood token for Andrew Sullano here. Some card selection, discarding that cut down.
Yeah, pretty dead card in the matchup, all things considered.
Yeah, I would say so. All right, so we're going to get aggro here. Cards coming in, going to hit Richard Neal for a large chunk of damage, down to 5, like you said, Monty. And Richard Neal, this is a turn.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a big relief for Richard seeing Andrew sack that blood token at the start of the turn, because one of the things that you would definitely be scared of in this position, considering you're at 5, would be an Invoke Despair for Andrew. So Andrew paying the 1 mana at the start of the turn, definitively saying, I won't be able to Invoke Despair you this turn, that is a huge sigh of relief for Richard, as that is the first step towards stabilization for him.
And like you said, we've seen this Domain deck come back with be able to stabilize in kind of really, truly impressive ways we saw this past weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. As Andrew just ponders which 3-drop card is going to follow this up, I think maybe some hesitation to deploy a second Graveyard Trespasser might be at hand, considering you're worried about a card like Sunfall.
Yeah, there it is. That's another Graveyard Trespasser for Andrew. It's going to pass the turn back over to Richard Neal. Big draw, big turn. Can we lock it down here, or are we going to die?
Yeah, there's the Sunfall. That's exactly what Andrew was worried about with deploying a secondary creature. Now all of his pressure is gone. Richard has an artifact, not a creature yet. So if Andrew has that Invoke Despair, it would still be dealing 4 damage and unlocking the Blood Tithe Harvester. But that's just going to be a Reckoner Bankbuster. That's not really going to get the job done in terms of pressure. And as we've seen time and time again, the Rakdos Midrange deck is not able to outvalue this 5-color ramp deck. Their only hope is aggression, and Richard has completely shut that down now.
After seeing what the metagame was like at the Pro Tour this past weekend, do you think this 5-color ramp deck was kind of the deck to bring given the field?
I think 5-color ramp was definitely great. I think Rakdos Midrange is still probably the best deck and the most consistent one in the field, even looking at the Sunday PTQ at the Pro Tour for the players that weren't qualified and wanted a final chance at Barcelona. The Sunday PTQ had 7 out of 8 decks in the top 8 be Rakdos Midrange. So even with people knowing about it and knowing about all the decks that came to combat at the Pro Tour, Rakdos Midrange still reigned supreme. So definitely, I think this 5-color ramp deck is strong, but we saw Nathan Sawyer overcome it. Of course, Nathan Sawyer overcame everything this weekend.
Yes, he did.
Overcome it handily in the top 4. So it's a deck that isn't an automatic win against Rakdos Midrange like you would be hoping for.
All right, so we see another invasion of Zendikar get attacked from the flipped egg into Phyrexian from Richard Neal there, flipping the other one in process, playing a new one. So he's got the board presence now, and Reckoner Bankbuster is just going to try and find some cards there for Andrew Sullano at the end of Richard Neal's turn.
Yeah, that's just a disaster for Andrew now. All he can do is play Blackleaf Fizz, pass the turn. We flip over to Knight, but there's no Trespassers on the battlefield to take advantage of that. And if you're just drawing and passing with Reckoner Bankbuster against this deck, now Richard is in a position where he can play a Tali, he can play a Troxa, he can play a full value Herd Migration for 5 3/3s. That's an Atali. And it just feels like it's close to impossible to come back now.
Yeah.
There's a Herd Migration. Herd Migration fail. All right, this game's over. Yeah. Andrew needs exactly Light Up the Night if he is playing that Light Up the Night, which is not a given by any means. We saw only a Team Handshake really had it. And if he doesn't have this Light Up the Night, this game is just well and truly over.
Wow, this is so impressive to see this 5-color ramp deck do its thing down to 5 life, just stabilizing like it's no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the cool things that, you know, we don't know if Richard has access to, but he may, is if he has another copy of Herd Migration in hand, then he could actually survive through a Light Up the Night as well, discarding that to gain that extra life.
Oh,
so
sure.
It feels like he is just well and truly protected here. If he has that, of course.
All right, there's an attack there from Richard Neal, turning the tables on Andrew Sullano, who once again just activates that Bank Buster to try and find something here to deal with the problem at hand.
It looks like he'd go for the throat there.
All right, go for the throat's going to take down the 4/4.
Yeah, so 3 damage coming across from Richard, knocking Andrew down to 17, and with the 2 spells cast, of course, thanks to Atali, more than 2 casts, that is going to be us flipping back today. But the big question remains for Andrew is, do you have Light Up the Night trying to close out this game, and will Richard have the herd migration in response to survive?
Richard Neal currently sitting at 5, Andrew Sullano at 17. About 1 million creatures on Richard's side of the battlefield. Tapping 4 mana for Sullano here. It's Shieldred.
Yeah, that's not enough. Richard has 25-ish, 27 power represented on the board, and just flashes the Leyline Binding as well. We are getting a producer note that Andrew has no copies of Light Up the Night in his deck, so that out, one of the things that we saw be so good for Nathan Storer in the matchup, not available for Andrew Sullano, and that does not really bode well considering the matchup is already pretty tough for the Rakdos midrange deck.
All right, on to game number 2. That's 1 game to Richard Neal. Starting things off very well, getting him 1 step closer to that awesome Secret Lair card.
All right, Razor Lash Transmogrant, the start for Andrew. It's a good start, but one of the interesting things about this 5-color ramp deck actually is that unlike 5-color decks that we've seen in the past, even the 5-color domain deck, it is not that non-basic heavy. Invasion of Zendikar as well as Herd Migration are very much incentivizing you to have basic lands in your deck to be able to go and fetch. So we see this start from Richard Neal, which isn't a bad one, that is just basic, and this Transmogrant isn't coming back for 6 mana too often in these games.
That's just a herd migration on the cycle there for Richard Neal. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, though, turn 3 for Andrew Sullano, just where you want to be.
Yeah, you started with a curve. You have Transmogrant, which is still a 2-mana 3/1, so you are getting damage through, into Fable, which is, of course, the best card in your deck, in the format. So this is as good of a curve as Andrew can hope for to start off the game. But again, the key is always going to be maintaining pressure. If Andrew can find something like a Duress next turn to make sure Richard doesn't have an Invasion of Zendikar on turn 4, I think that would be really good for him.
All right, there we get a Topiary Stomper on turn 3, what we were looking for last game from Richard Neal.
Yeah, Richard saying, I'm just going to resolve the trigger and pass the turn back to you so you can go ahead. Maybe that 3rd color of mana now. So the Leyline Binding's already getting a nice discount. They're down to 3 mana should Richard have any in hand. And the Topiary Stomper, of course, can't attack or block until you have 7 lands in play. So as good as the 4/4 body looks right now, it is not really doing anything unless Richard has that Invasion of Zendikar as the follow-up next turn.
Right, so just sitting there watching the destruction come his way here from Andrew Sullano. Getting ready for the land drop for turn.
Yeah, Andrew just resolving the Fable 2nd chapter during the pre-combat main phase, choosing what 2 cards, if any, that he'll be discarding. And it looks like it's a Bank Buster plus a Haunted Ridge going down here.
We'll see what Andrew Sullano chooses to do here for this turn. Still early on in game number 2. Both players, though, kind of doing the thing, in quotes, that their deck wants to do for early game setup.
Yeah, excuse me, that is the Sulphur Springs actually hitting the graveyard. But 5 damage coming through for Andrew is going to do a good job of pressuring Richard's life total.
All right, Richard down to 15 after that attack.
All right, and the big question for Andrew is, does he have a follow-up? As he is thinking Treasure Token, of course, made from the Goblin Shaman, so this could be an Invoke Despair if Andrew has one. Moving the treasure onto play means not using it as just a Shieldred. This is a very nice aggressive curve from Andrew Sullano, and no upkeep answer for Richard Neal.
All right, so Richard Neal going to continue to take a little bit of damage there as long as that Shieldred stays on the battlefield for Andrew Sullano. There's land number 5, and there's Invasion of Zendikar.
Yeah, so this is the curve, quote unquote, that you're looking for as the 5-color ramp deck. It does look to be a little slow this game, considering you were on the draw. The Shieldred is a 4/5, is already outstatting your Topiary Stomper, so you don't get the free attack that you're hoping for into the Invasion of Zendikar, getting that 4/4 as well. So everything just a little awkward, though. However, I will say, if Richard Neal has the follow-up Leyline Binding here, it is only one man to get rid of that Shieldred, attack this Invasion, and flip it. The game completely turns around.
You know what's so interesting to me is, oh, there's Leyline Binding. Good call, Monty.
Here's the Leyline Binding. This is absolutely massive as the game completely shifts now. It is a full 180 swing the other way, and Richard Neal firmly in the driver's seat now.
Oh, holy cow. And that Topiary Stomper able to attack into that Invasion of Zendikar, unlocking the creature on the backside. Plus that Leyline Binding dealing with Shieldred. A huge swing. This deck capable of just enormous swings back and forth in these games.
Yeah, these are really the powerful turns that this 5-color ramp deck is capable of. Having access to 1 mana targeted removal is extremely impressive. And this Leyline Binding just does so much work.
I want that +1/+1 counters though.
There's Chandra, Hope's Beacon for Andrew Sullano, and maybe it will be the Hope's Beacon that he needs here to reassert dominance in this game after seeing how Richard Neal was able to turn the tables on him last turn.
Yeah, and that is going to be a huge swing. The Chandra is going to just knock down both of the 4 toughness creatures and allow Andrew to get through for another 5 damage. I believe that knocks Richard down to just 8 life. The Chandra surviving on the battlefield, so there's a lot of permanence that Andrew has to deal with now, and a Sunfall alone won't do it. The Chandra will remain on the battlefield.
And we've talked about how Chandra just staying alive for 1 turn is a pretty good bellwether to whether or not you're going to get a GG.
Yeah, 6 mana now being tapped for Richard. That is going to be an Archangel of Wrath. That is pretty good because with the double kicker, you get to kill both the Chandra and the Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. You also gain 4 life because the Archangel has lifelink. So Richard going up to 12 from 8. The 3/4 lifelinker on the board is checking both of these creatures. That was about as good of a card as you could hope for if you're Richard Neal.
Oh, I'm just so incredibly impressed with this deck and how it feels chunky, right? It feels unwieldy. Oh, and oh, there it is.
That should be the game.
Okay.
Both of those down. Richard down to 10 life, and now Shieldred's on the battlefield. 5 more damage coming across would put Richard down to 5. And every time it feels like Richard is making a huge swingy play to get back into it, this Rakdos midrange deck is just answering back. And it really is speaking to the resilience and power of this Rakdos midrange deck that it can continue doing these haymaking returns turn after turn.
Absolutely. You normally don't see a deck that's content with winning, you know, having a good curve, getting out Fable, maybe getting out a 2-drop, smashing you, being able to come back from a deficit like we just saw Richard Neal try to inflict on Andrew Sullano.
2 more mana. That is a Bloodtithe Harvester hitting the board along with a blood token, and with Richard Neal down to just 5 life, it is going to be 3 after the Shieldred trigger as we do see Andrew Sullano mark it down. And once again, Dire Straits, I think this needs to be a Sunfall for Richard to have any shot in this game.
All right, we'll see if Richard can get back into this, if he has a Sunfall in hand or found it off the top of the deck. Otherwise, it might be a lights out and Andrew Sullano evening things up here, potentially at 1 game apiece.
Yeah, we could see Richard have something like a Herd Migration here that would make 5 3/3s breach the multiverse.
All right, let's go digging.
Flipping.
Spin the wheel.
All right, there's an Atali already found for Richard. There's a Shieldred on the other side as well. So Atali of yours, Shieldred from the opponent, that could potentially stabilize this board as you essentially negate your opponent's Shieldred triggers, deciding what is better between the Archangel and Atali. I would be shocked if Richard doesn't go for Atali in this spot.
Atali is just such an incredible card and really surprising one to me to find in a standard format. It's just so expensive.
Now, notably, Breach the Multiverse can get Planeswalkers as well. So even though it isn't being presented as an option right now, Richard could get the Chandra from Andrew, and that is exactly what he does. This Chandra would double any instance or sorceries that this Atali finds. So if Richard hits something like a Herd Migration here, or something to that effect off the top of his deck. That would have been a huge swing, but as things stand, ossification for him, Blood Tithe Harvester from Andrew Sullano, and that is still going to do a good job of cleaning up this board. You could ossification the Shieldred, use the Chandra to pick off the Blood Tithe Harvester, plus the Goblin Shaman token, leaving yourself with a Tolly and a Blood Tithe Harvester, and Andrew would have just a Transmogrant in play.
Well, this is incredible. I thought he was dead a turn ago.
The swings from this deck can just be absolutely massive.
It's just unreal.
There is so much cool stuff that is happening in the standard format, and it is really wild just how back and forth games can be.
There's ossification taking down Shieldred as the target there from Richard Neal. But
it's going to sack this blood in response, take the 2 extra life, just making sure that you are getting maximum value if you're going to be using that blood anyways. It does cost you a treasure, but the 2 life can matter if Richard is the aggressor and in the driver's seat.
That's nice. Good clean play from our players here.
Chandra yet to be activated.
Oh, you're heavier. Yeah, I missed that.
And giving Richard a blood token. There is one already on the battlefield over there on the right side, so fortunately no double blood there. Players cleaned that up, and here we go. Chandra going to be ticking down for 2, and there's the Harvester and the Goblin Shaman going down.
Oh my god, this is such an impressive display from this deck. And Richard Neal just ready to try and close this thing out versus Andrew Sullano there. What can Andrew Sullano do to get back in this game?
Another Chandra can go to any target, and Richard was still at 3 life, but that just goes to the face and clean things up for Andrew Sullano.
We are tied up 1 game apiece, Andrew Sullano and Richard Neal, for the ultra awesome rare exclusive Secret Lair Brainstorm. Here we go, game 3.
Yeah, only the 2nd in the world. Those cards are very valuable, so definitely both players going to try their hardest. Notably, we do see mulligans to 6 for both players in this 3rd game, but it is going to be Richard Neal on the play, which can absolutely be massive. We saw how close that game was, just a huge back and forth, and if Richard has this Topiary Stomper this time on turn 3, that would go a long way towards giving him a massive advantage in this game.
All right, here we go. There it is, Topiary Stomper for Richard Neal versus the Razor Lash from Andrew Sullano to kick off game 3.
Step 1 done. That's the first test. Andrew does have the Transmogrant, but as mentioned, not the best card in this matchup. You do see Richard starting off with 2 Sparrows Headquarters, but the chances of him adding more to this board in terms of non-basics are pretty low over the next few turns. And if Richard has this Invasion of Zendikar follow-up, this game could end very quickly.
Graveyard Trespasser is going to be the follow-up play after the attack there from the Transmogrant from Andrew Sullano, knocking Richard Neal down to 17.
Still nothing to remove from the graveyard, so not going to get any advantage from that trigger. And this is the next big test. If Richard Neal has the 1-2 curve of Stomper into Invasion of Zendikar in this deciding game, that's 4 mana, Maria.
Bonnie,
This is the dream curve for the 5-color ramp deck. This is why you play the deck, and when you're able to hit this in a game of such high stakes, it is the absolute dream that Richard Neal is living here. Not only that, now Domain is online for him, and I know I saw a Leyline Binding in his hand as well, so even if Andrew has one of those huge follow-ups like a Shieldred, Richard has the answer. This Topiary Stomper can now attack this Invasion of Zendikar with Vigilance. You'll have 2 4/4 blockers left. This is already a disaster for Andrew Sullano.
and I mean, all that aside, also 7 mana to 3 doesn't feel great.
Yeah, this is the power of this 5-color ramp deck. This is why it is on full display. This is why players choose to play this deck, and you can see exactly why. Rakdos Midrange on the draw, they've played some creatures, and it already feels like they're pretty dead in this spot.
All right, there's Fable of the Mirror Breaker from Sullano, but things looking really, really grim for the Rakdos player.
Wouldn't have been surprised to see Richard Neal just use Leyline Binding at the end of that turn to take out the Fable of the Mirror Breaker, not allow Andrew to have access to any card selection. But with 7 mana, I think we are going to see one of those big haymakers come out from Richard Neal, whether it is the Archangel, the Leyline, the Herd Migration, the Atraxa, or the Atali.
Any number of delicious cards.
Yeah.
Both of these creatures getting in the red zone. And there's lane light binding, yeah.
Yeah, so Richard actually started that off with an attack with both vigilance creatures. Andrew chose to double block the flipped invasion of Zendikar, and I think that is a nod to understanding that Richard only has one mounted in play, so if that creature dies, Richard wouldn't have the second red for a potential Itali in hand, and maybe you can try to lock him off of that and put yourself in a better position.
How about another invasion?
It's pretty good. You are getting to a point where the mana does have diminishing returns. You don't really need it anymore, but of course you are fully the aggressor here. Using that leyline binding on a shaman token that didn't really matter there is a bit awkward if you are Richard Neal, but with your mana fully fixed now, having that second mountain as well, you do feel less vulnerable, which is a pretty good place to be.
Right, fetching up that mountain and another plains there for Richard Neal off that second invasion. Looking in a strong spot here in game number 3.
Yeah, Sullano did get the ability to discard 2 lands to that second chapter of Fable of the Mirror Breaker, so some card selection leading to a Shieldred. But Richard is ready with the second leyline binding, and you can see at the pace and confidence that Richard is playing, he fully understands that he is in the driver's seat right now.
Absolutely, and maybe a reason why we were firing off that other leyline binding kind of a little easier last turn. There's another attack. We're going to flip our second invasion of Zendikar here, make another 4/4. Oh boy.
Yeah, it's a little awkward with Andrew at 16. It does feel tempting to send 8 damage to face and just put him on a 2-turn clock.
Sure.
But I think playing it safe, saying, I'll put you to 12 and get a 4/4 here, that's going to be good for me. And I think you can see why. Richard really doesn't have a follow-up. He spent 3 mana cycling Aspara's headquarters there, but didn't have a 7 mana Haymaker to follow it up. So this is a bit of a signal for Andrew Sullano that there is an avenue back into this game if he is able to amp up the pressure and deal with this board.
Reflection of Kiki Jiki hits the table there for Sullano. What is the best thing he can do here?
It's tough. Reflection is summoning 6, so you're not really going to get any advantage out of it this turn. Chandra would be okay. Invoke Despair is awkward because that leyline binding that hit a Goblin Shaman token earlier is an easy sacrifice for Richard Neal, meaning that Shieldred is not at risk of coming back, and a second Fable is fine, but you are facing so many 4/4s that the pressure is just going to continue coming from Richard. Now down to 4 for Andrew Sullano, and really feels like he has 1 turn to do something.
Yeah, huge attack there from Richard Neal, like you said, putting Sullano down to 4.
And 7 mana being lined up.
Okay, what Haymaker are we going to see here from Richard Neal?
An Archangel of Wrath, if he had it, would just close the game, but that is only 6 mana, so 7 means Atraxa. I don't know if there's any way coming back. There's the fist bump, and Richard Neal getting the job done, Maria.
And that is Richard Neal with 5-color ramp taking down the match and winning the Secret Lair Brainstorm.
Yeah, just really impressive stuff. You saw that his deck was able to do exactly what it needed to in games 1 and 3. A little bit of a stumble, but still a huge back and forth game in game 2. So ultimately getting it done, and I think he has to be ecstatic, winning that oversized Brainstorm, winning that regular Brainstorm, the real prize of the tournament. And it's just really impressive stuff from him.
All right, well, congratulations once again to Richard Neal for winning the Secret Lair Showdown. You still have 2 more chances to win yet this year, so go out there and qualify for this awesome tournament. Get yourself one of those really, really cool brainstorms. Bye!
Bye!